The first time Carmen Rayburn opened the old, battered suitcase, she felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just the weight of the past that pressed down on her. It was the sheer volume of secrets that lay inside. The suitcase was stuffed to the brim with letters, contracts, and other documents, all dated and neatly organized. But it was the letters that caught her eye, hundreds of them, each penned by a different celebrity. Marlon Brando, Elvis Presley, Harry Belafonte, and Tom Tryon. Their names were like a roll call of Hollywood's golden age, and their words were a tangled web of stories that seemed too wild to be true. Carmen had bought the suitcase at a state auction in California, thinking it might contain some valuable memorabilia. But what she found was far more than she could have imagined. The letters were a window into the private lives of these iconic figures, revealing their deepest fears, joys, and darkest secrets. And as she read through them, she began to realize that something was very, very wrong. The letters were dated over a span of nearly 5 years, and each one was a masterpiece of detail and emotion. There were descriptions of concerts, TV shows, and news events that could be verified, but there was more private events, personal traumas, and even criminal activities that seemed too horrific to be real. Elvis wrote about being brutally assaulted by unknown assailants. Marlon described finding Elvis bound and bloodied in his living room, and Harry and Tom added their own harrowing tales. Carmen couldn't help but wonder, was this all real, or was it a carefully crafted conspiracy? If it was a conspiracy, it was one of the most elaborate she had ever heard of. Forging hundreds of letters in the handwriting of different celebrities, each with its own unique style, would require a team of skilled forgers and a level of coordination that seemed almost impossible. And what could be the motive? Why would anyone go to such lengths to create these letters? As Carmen delved deeper into the letters, she started to notice the intricate web of details that wove through them. Dates of concerts, names of casinos, and even the weather on specific days, all of it, had to be checked and cross-referenced. It was a monumental task, but Carmen was determined to uncover the truth. She spent countless hours poring over newspaper archives, online databases, and even conducting interviews with people who might have known the celebrities. One of the most frustrating aspects of her investigation was that she only had the letters sent to her. She had no way of knowing what Carmen Montes, the original recipient, had written back. It was like trying to understand a conversation by only hearing one side of it. But even with this limitation, Carmen began to see patterns and connections that made her believe the letters might be genuine. Elvis's letters, in particular, stood out. In one letter, dated March 9, 1969, he wrote about his relationship with Priscilla, his father's second marriage, and his belief that he was part Indian and part Welsh. The writing was neat and organized, with small, precise letters that indicated a clear and focused mind. But in another letter, written shortly after a home invasion, the emotion poured out in a torrent of words. The handwriting was larger, more erratic, and filled with jabs and crosses that suggested impatience and frustration. Carmen showed the letters to a handwriting expert, Jane Hollis, who had a unique background as both a clinical psychologist and a certified graph analyst. Jane's analysis revealed a man who was deeply rooted in reality, with a strong will and a tendency to consider the feelings of others. But the second letter showed a different side of Elvis, a man who was shaken and scared, yet still trying to maintain his composure. As Carmen continued her investigation, she found more and more evidence that the letters were authentic. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized that the truth was far more complex and unsettling than she could have ever imagined. The letters were a puzzle, and each piece she uncovered only led to more questions. Who was behind this? What was their motive? And most importantly, what really happened to Elvis, Marlon, Harry, and Tom? The suitcase had opened a door to a world of secrets and lies, and Carmen was determined to find out what lay on the other side. Jane Hollis, the graph analyst, continued her deep dive into the handwriting of some of the most iconic figures of the 20th century. Her insights offered a rare glimpse into the personalities and emotional states of Elvis Presley, Harry Belafonte, and Marlon Brando, all of whom had written letters to Carmen Montes. Elvis's handwriting was a window into his complex and often guarded world. Small, lower loops in his writing, whether round or squared off, revealed a tendency to be clannish. This meant that Elvis was selective about who he let into his inner circle, trusting only a few people with his deepest secrets. This clannishness might explain why so few people knew about his relationship with Carmen Montes, or his close friendships with Marlon Brando and Tom Parker. The way Elvis wrote the personal pronoun I provided even more insight. The large upper loop in his eye suggested that his mother had a strong influence on him, while the lack of a bottom loop indicated that his father's influence was weak or shallow. This imbalance could explain why Elvis felt a strong need to bond with a small group of trusted male friends, perhaps as a way to establish a sense of male camaraderie. Elvis's ambitious nature was also evident in his handwriting. Long lead and strokes showed his controlling nature, and the size of his writing indicated that he set high goals for himself. He thrived on challenges and felt restless when he reached a plateau in his career. This drive and ambition were crucial to his success, but they also made him highly impatient. When Elvis wrote the second letter, he was in a highly emotional state following a traumatic home invasion. The writing was larger and more chaotic, with lines of text often overlapping. This suggested a state of restlessness and confusion, as if he was overwhelmed by the recent events. His organizational skills and attention to detail, which were strong in the first letter, had diminished. The lighter pressure on the pen showed that he was trying to ease his mind, perhaps by writing about the incident to Carmen. Interestingly, despite the trauma, Elvis's anxiety had lessened. However, his writing showed a degree of emotional volatility, with sudden changes in the slant of his letters. He seemed more impulsive and suggestible, possibly considering drastic measures to escape his situation. The high-floating T-bars in some letters indicated that his thinking had become somewhat detached from reality, as if he was dreaming of a different life. Harry Belafonte's handwriting, on the other hand, revealed a man with a strong and commanding presence. When Harry entered a room, he immediately captured everyone's attention. His sharp, quick mind was evident in his writing, which showed a strong ability to reason, plan, and solve problems. The acquisitive hook in his writing, particularly in the capital C, indicated his interest in acquiring knowledge rather than material things. Harry's high emotional intelligence was also clear. He was skilled at managing his own emotions and those of others, often using his persuasive abilities to influence people. His writing showed a persistent and sometimes dominating nature, but he was generally fair and tactful. Harry's creativity and artistic bent were evident in the Greek epsilon-like ease in his writing, suggesting that he wanted Carmen to see him as an artist. Harry's handwriting also included cover strokes, which indicated that he could sometimes mislead others to protect himself or achieve his goals. His strong dejection regarding a male figure in his life, possibly his father, was shown in the strong final downward stroke of the capital I. This could explain why he sometimes became dejected in certain situations, but he often seized opportunities to prove himself. Marlon Brando's handwriting, particularly in the first letter MB1, revealed a fundamentally optimistic and empathetic person. The strong rightward slant of his writing showed that he had a high ability to understand and relate to others. This was consistent with stories from his early years, where he was known for his sensitivity and willingness to help those in need. In the second letter, signed as Jenny, Marlon's writing took on a different character. The downward sloping T-bars suggested a more dominant and forceful personality, possibly reflecting a shift in his state of mind. This spirit writing was an interesting phenomenon, showing how Marlon's agile mind could adapt and change, even within the same day. Through these analyses, Jane Hollis provided a fascinating look into the inner worlds of these iconic figures, revealing the complexities and nuances of their personalities through the simple act of writing. Marlon's early years were marked by moments of bravery and a deep sense of justice. One of the most memorable events was when his childhood friend, Wally Cox, faced bullying at school. Wally, known for his small size, horn-rimmed glasses, and high intellect, was often picked on by a group of students. Marlon, who was a sturdy young man and not one to shy away from a fight, stepped in to defend his friend. This act of courage was just one of many that demonstrated Marlon's strong compassion for the underdog. Despite his compassionate nature, Marlon was also strong-willed and had a deep desire to control his own life. This sometimes extended to controlling others, especially when their actions affected him. However, he was clever and often led through persuasion rather than force. He could be so convincing that people would often do what he wanted without realizing it. Marlon's empathy often led him to help others, even at a cost to himself. Yet he could also feign interest in things he didn't care about, just to avoid hurting someone's feelings. Marlon's quick wit and analytical mind were evident in his ability to solve complex problems. He was a fast learner and often reached conclusions before others, which sometimes made him impatient with those who were slower to understand. This trait was reflected in his handwriting, where the N in insane showed sharp points, indicating quick thinking, and rounded humps, suggesting logical reasoning. Marlon's love for a good debate was another aspect of his personality. He enjoyed arguing a point and usually won, unless he was up against someone like Harry Belafonte. Marlon knew when a fight was worth having, and when to yield strategically to achieve a greater good. His handwriting, particularly the upper stroke on the letter P, revealed his fondness for debate. One of the most touching aspects of Marlon's character was his sense of responsibility for others, especially his friend Elvis Presley. In a letter to Elvis, Marlon showed deep concern for his well-being and offered to help him. The responsibility loop in his handwriting, especially when writing the name Elvis, indicated that he felt a personal obligation to support his friend. Marlon's handwriting also revealed his honesty and high standards. He was fiercely honest and had a strong sense of right and wrong. This was partly due to a stubborn feeling of self-consciousness, possibly stemming from a fear of being considered less than others. This self-consciousness was evident in his handwriting when the second hump in the letter N, or the second instance of a double letter L or T, was taller than the first. Marlon's relationship with his parents, particularly his father, was complex. His father was known for being rigid and emotionally distant, often absent from family events. This could have contributed to Marlon's feeling of being less than his peers. However, Marlon's strong will and confidence, evident in his later handwriting, suggested that he had worked through these issues and felt accepted by both his parents. One of the most intriguing aspects of Marlon's life was his connection to Elvis Presley's deceased girlfriend, Jenny. In a letter where Marlon seemed to channel Jenny's spirit, his handwriting changed dramatically. The larger script indicated a heightened need for awareness and a broader perspective, possibly reflecting a state of high alert. The presence of X shapes in the T's suggested that Marlon had been deeply influenced by the death of someone close to him, possibly Jenny. Jane, a graphologist, explained that while graph analysis couldn't confirm if Marlon was channeling Jenny, the significant changes in his handwriting suggested a shift in his emotional state. The restlessness and confusion in the Jenny letter, along with the frequent X shapes, pointed to a person who was highly affected by the death of a loved one. Marlon's friendship with Elvis was marked by a deep bond and mutual trust. However, both men had strong personalities and a need to control their lives, which sometimes led to conflicts. Their compatibility was a mix of strong wills and a shared desire to succeed. Tom Jones, another friend of Marlon and Elvis, had a unique personality reflected in his handwriting. Tom was a man of immense energy and compassion, though he showed less interest in caring for others compared to Marlon, Elvis, and Harry. His exuberant handwriting, with its long T-bars and generous ending strokes, revealed his contagious enthusiasm and desire to be seen as generous. Tom's writing also showed a willingness to emulate successful people, like Elvis, to improve himself. He was persistent and refused to give up easily, even in the face of obstacles. However, he could be resentful and had a tendency to rationalize his actions to feel good about himself. Tom's handwriting also indicated a deep responsibility for his mother, Frida, who had raised him and his sister. As long as Frida continued to support him, he felt fine about this responsibility. The letters and handwriting of Marlon, Elvis, and Tom Jones provided a fascinating insight into their personalities and the deep connections they shared. Each man's unique traits and experiences contributed to the rich tapestry of their lives and friendships. The letter from Carmen Montes to her friend Carmen Rayburn in March 1980 revealed a lot about Carmen's personality and her struggles. Carmen's handwriting showed a unique pattern that gave insights into her life and character. Carmen's writing had a very steep upward slope, which usually means someone is really optimistic. But in Carmen's case, The extreme slope suggested that her optimism was more of a coping mechanism. She might have been dealing with some tough stuff, and used her positive attitude to keep going. One interesting detail in her writing was a series of tiny blobs at the bottom of some letters. These blobs often appear when someone has a physical issue, like a leg injury. This could mean Carmen had a limp or a leg problem, which might have made her self-conscious. Self-consciousness can make a person overly sensitive to what others think, and Carmen's wide loops in her letters suggested she was indeed very sensitive to criticism. Carmen's writing also showed that she had a strong competitive spirit. She loved debates and arguments, and she was determined to win. This competitive nature might have come from her own insecurities, but it also made her persistent and unrelenting when she believed in something. Despite her competitive side, Carmen had a generous heart. Her letters often ended with long, upward strokes, indicating that she was always ready to help others. She was empathetic and could sense when someone was feeling down. Carmen would often try to lift their spirits, even if it meant pushing aside her own doubts and insecurities. Carmen's religious beliefs and spiritual side were also evident in her writing. She had a deep sense of faith and a strong moral compass, which guided her actions. She was the kind of person who would do almost anything to help someone in need, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort. Carmen's close friendship with Elvis Presley was another important part of her life. Elvis often confided in her, sharing his deepest fears and insecurities. One of the topics they discussed was his complicated relationships with women, particularly Nancy Sinatra and Anne Margaret. Nancy Sinatra had been a significant figure in Elvis's life. She was the daughter of the famous singer Frank Sinatra, and had pursued Elvis aggressively. Even though Elvis had moved on to a relationship with Priscilla Beaulieu, Nancy continued to try to win his heart. Their interactions were often reported in the media, causing tension in Elvis's relationship with Priscilla. Anne Margaret was another story. She and Elvis had a deep connection, but their relationship ended in disappointment. Elvis felt betrayed by Anne, and he talked to Carmen about his feelings of hurt and confusion. Carmen, with her empathetic nature, was a good listener and offered him the support he needed. Elvis's relationship with Carmen was unique. He trusted her deeply and shared many of his personal struggles with her. However, there were still some things he kept to himself, perhaps because they were too sensitive or painful to talk about. Carmen's letters and conversations with Elvis showed that she was more than just a friend. She was a confidante and a spiritual advisor. Carmen's life was a mix of optimism, self-doubt, and a strong desire to help others. Her handwriting revealed a complex personality, shaped by her past experiences and her deep faith. Despite her challenges, Carmen remained a beacon of hope and support for those around her, especially for Elvis, who relied on her during some of the toughest times in his life. Elvis and Nancy's relationship was a whirlwind of emotions and drama. It all started with a quiet, intense moment where he held her closely, kissed her, and then quickly apologized and left. Nancy was left confused and heartbroken. She couldn't forget that moment, and it only fueled her obsession with Elvis. 6 months into Priscilla's pregnancy, Nancy did something unexpected. She called Priscilla and offered to throw a baby shower. Priscilla was bewildered by the gesture, but agreed after Elvis assured her that Nancy was a nice person. The baby shower went well, and Priscilla found herself liking Nancy. However, Nancy's behavior towards Elvis didn't cool down. Instead, it became more aggressive. Elvis told Carmen that he wasn't even particularly attracted to Nancy. He thought she was too skinny and too aggressive, but he couldn't deny that she was a dangerous distraction. After Lisa Marie was born, Elvis confided in Carmen that he believed Priscilla had been unfaithful. He never mentioned who he suspected, but he was deeply hurt and disillusioned. Nancy's constant pursuit only made things worse. Elvis felt cornered and desperate. He even considered telling Nancy that he was homosexual, just to get her off his back. Marlon Brando, a close friend, tried to help by hiding Elvis at his house. But Nancy tracked him down and confronted him, leading to a wild and steamy scene that ended with Elvis being rescued by Marlon and Nancy fleeing to avoid her father's wrath. Despite all the drama, Elvis turned to Nancy during one of his most challenging times. In 1969, he was set to headline a series of concerts in Las Vegas. He was both excited and terrified. The pressure was immense, and he was worried about his voice and his ability to draw a crowd. The shows were a huge success, and Elvis was hailed as a comeback king, but the stress was taking a toll on him. He collapsed after the final performance and was hospitalized. During his breakdown, he ended up at Nancy's hotel room and later at Marlon's house, in a state of confusion and paranoia. This episode revealed just how fragile his mental state had become. Anne-Margret was a different story. She was talented, charming, and had a chemistry with Elvis that was hard to ignore. They starred together in Viva Las Vegas, and the attraction between them was obvious. However, Elvis's insecurity got the better of him. Anne-Margret's public comments about their relationship pushed him over the edge, and he broke things off. He told Carmen that he disliked everything about Anne-Margret, but Carmen could see through his words. She believed that Elvis knew he had made his choice and couldn't go back. Elvis's life was a roller coaster of emotions, from the intense moments with Nancy to the heartbreak with Anne-Margret. Through it all, he struggled with his own insecurities and the pressures of fame. Despite his outward success, the toll on his inner world was significant. Elvis had many romantic adventures with famous and not-so-famous women, but some stood out more than others. One of these was a young actress named Annette Day. She wasn't the most beautiful or the most talented, but she had something special that touched Elvis deeply. They met on the set of the movie Double Trouble. Annette had never acted before, but producer Judd Bernard saw something in her and cast her in the film. Elvis and Annette quickly became close friends. She would do little things for him, like knitting him socks and baking a lopsided birthday cake. These gestures meant the world to Elvis. He told his friend Carmen that Annette really understood him, and that made her different from the other women he knew. Not all of Elvis's encounters were as sweet as his time with Annette. One funny story involves a woman named Tondaleo, a dancer from Tahiti. She was at Marlon Brando's house and saw Elvis sleeping on the sofa. She started kissing him, and it took Marlon a while to get her to stop. Elvis was laughing, but also a bit confused. He didn't know how to get her to leave, and Marlon joked that he should try speaking French or Spanish. Elvis, not knowing those languages, just hoped it would be over soon. On the set of Charo, Elvis had to work closely with a co-star named Lynn Kellogg. She was beautiful, but made Elvis very uncomfortable. She would rub against him and whisper inappropriate things in his ear. During a break, Marlon saw her dancing around naked in her dressing room, which made Elvis even more uncomfortable. When they filmed a love scene, Elvis had trouble focusing on his lines because Lynn was running her fingers through his hair. He had to be a gentleman, but it was hard to concentrate with all the distractions. The woman who truly haunted Elvis's thoughts was Jenny Pearson. She was a mystery to everyone, but Elvis spoke about her with deep affection. He had brought Jenny to Hollywood to start a modeling career, but she eventually left. Elvis felt that Jenny and his mother, Gladys, were the only women who truly understood him. He often thought about Jenny, especially during his sleepless nights. He even wrote songs, hoping she would hear them and come back to him. Elvis feared that Jenny might be gone forever, and this thought brought him a lot of pain. One night during a party at his new home, Elvis was feeling very tired and upset. Priscilla, his wife, was being mean to him, and he responded by doing his famous bedroom wiggle on the piano. This only made things worse. Later, Marlon saw Elvis in the den crying. Then something strange happened. Marlon saw a woman in a blue dress standing over Elvis, as if she wanted to comfort him. The woman looked at Marlon and disappeared. Marlon knew it was Jenny. After that, Marlon sometimes felt like Jenny was communicating with him, writing messages to Carmen that Marlon couldn't remember writing himself. Elvis's thoughts often turned to his mother and Jenny. He believed they were the ones who truly understood him. Even on the day he died, Elvis might have been thinking about them. Jenny Pearson may have been a small part of his life, but her memory had a lasting impact on the king of rock and roll. Priscilla Presley's book, Elvis and Me, tells her side of the story about her life with Elvis. It's mostly about their time before they got married. The last part of the book talks about Elvis and his friends writing letters to Carmen Montes, but it doesn't mention the deep friendships that Elvis had with the people in those letters. It's frustrating to have so many real, emotional letters from Elvis, and not be able to share them directly. But because of copyright laws, we can't just publish the letters. So we have to find other ways to tell the story. Priscilla's book is a memoir, which means it's based on her memories. Memories can be tricky. They can change over time, and sometimes people remember things differently. So it's only fair to let Elvis tell his side of the story through his letters. In Elvis and Me, Priscilla talks about how she and Elvis wanted to have children, but they weren't planning to have them right away. She describes a moment when she felt a strange sensation in her stomach and realized she might be pregnant. Lisa Marie, their daughter, was born on February 1st, 1968, exactly 9 months after Priscilla and Elvis got married. So this event must have happened in the second half of 1967. Priscilla's account is probably true, based on what she remembers. But Elvis's letters give us a different perspective. In a letter to Carmen written just before Lisa Marie was born, Elvis talked about how much he wanted to have children. He said his childhood, where he had no siblings, made him feel lonely, and he didn't want his own kids to feel the same way. Elvis was excited about having a family. In June, after watching his new movie, Speedway, he wrote to Carmen that he and Priscilla had agreed to have 8 children. But he also said he wasn't sure if he could keep being with Priscilla. He was considering getting counseling to see if they could fix things. If he stayed with her, it would only be for Lisa Marie's sake. Just before writing this letter, Priscilla told Elvis she might be pregnant again. He wasn't sure if she was telling the truth. He thought she might be lying to try to fix their relationship or to get back at him for something he had done. A month later, her pregnancy was confirmed. Priscilla and Elvis talked about whether to tell the public, but Elvis didn't want to. He was worried that having another baby would make it harder for him to leave Priscilla if he wanted to. Elvis's decision to keep the pregnancy a secret worked. There's no public record of a second pregnancy, but we know about it because of the letter Elvis wrote to Carmen. We have to wonder if Elvis was being honest, lying, exaggerating, or if he was just confused. These are the same questions we have to ask about all the letters and stories that try to tell the truth about what really happened. Elvis and Priscilla had different views on having children and their relationship. Priscilla's book and Elvis's letters show us 2 sides of the same story, and sometimes they don't match. But together, they give us a fuller picture of their lives together. Elvis and Priscilla's relationship was like a roller coaster, full of ups and downs, twists and turns. One moment they were in love, and the next they were at each other's throats. The summer of 1968 was a particularly rough time for them. After a heated argument, Elvis accidentally backed his car over Priscilla, causing her to be hospitalized. This tragic event revealed that Priscilla had suffered 2 miscarriages in the past 6 months, a fact that Elvis had no idea about. The news shook him to his core, and he struggled with feelings of guilt and anger. Despite the trauma, Priscilla survived, but the incident left deep scars on both of them. Elvis's world was a mix of fame, pressure, and personal turmoil. He turned to his close friends for support, like Marlon Brando, who sometimes gave him acting lessons. One evening, Marlon showed up at Elvis's house and noticed something was off. Elvis seemed distant, and it wasn't long before the reason became clear. Priscilla was in the house, and later, Marlon discovered that she was in bed with Elvis's cousin and valet, Gigi Gamble. Elvis's reaction was explosive. He stormed into the guest house, threw Gigi's belongings out, and almost beat him up. The situation was chaotic, and Marlon feared for everyone's safety. Despite the betrayal, Elvis's heart was torn. He couldn't bring himself to cut ties with Gigi or Priscilla. A few days later, he even called an old flame, Connie Stevens, to go out on a date, hoping it would hurt Priscilla. But he eventually canceled the date, realizing it could cause more problems than it would solve. The drama continued as Patsy, Elvis's cousin and secretary, left Graceland because Priscilla accused her of sleeping with Elvis. Patsy and Elvis had grown closer after Gigi's betrayal, and Patsy had even stayed with Elvis when he was ill. But the misunderstanding and tension led to Patsy's departure. Priscilla eventually reached out to Elvis, saying she wanted him back. Despite all the pain, Elvis couldn't ignore the love they once shared. He agreed to take her back, but the relationship was never the same. They were like 2 people trying to patch up a broken vase, knowing it would never be the same as before. Their marriage became a fragile truce, with both of them walking on eggshells, afraid to upset the delicate balance. The trust was shattered and the love was tarnished, but they tried to make it work for the sake of their daughter, Lisa Marie. The end of the 1960s was a time of healing and uncertainty, as Elvis and Priscilla navigated the choppy waters of their relationship, hoping to find a way to move forward.